monsters, madness, and magic.
All right, folks, welcome to the Monsters, Madness, and Magic podcast. I'm your host, Justin, here with a quick word before we dive in. Now, in this episode, I chat with actor Adrienne Wilkinson about collecting books, growing up in a small town, Xena, warrior princess, New Zealand, and more. As always, thank you all for listening out there, and without further ado, here you go. All right, Adrienne, take us back in time. You're a youngster. Would you consider yourself a book reader, fort builder, troublemaker, or all of the above?
I'm 2 out of 3. I was a book reader inside of a fort that I had built. I was the opposite of a troublemaker. I was always trying to be as well behaved as possible. Yeah.
So let's start with books then. Did you have an author, a genre that you lean towards? Fantasy, anything like that?
Oh gosh. I've just always been a reader, still am, love it. I just think it's so incredibly beneficial for the brain, both in terms of I think it's a very satisfying activity for the brain, but I also think it's mind expanding in a way that other things aren't as much. The pace requires you to digest information in a different way than, say, movies or other forms of media do. I mean, I read honestly everything. If I think it's good, if it appeals to me, I just love beautifully written things.
Hmm.
So fiction, nonfiction, all sorts of genres. The only thing I ever really got stuck on in a good way, when I was a preteen into my early teens, I was diving deep into fantasy novels. The caveat was they just had to include a dragon, and then I'd be happy.
I think a lot of people can relate to that.
I think so. I think so.
So I think this is self-evident based on your background, but you still read a lot today.
I do. Yeah, I've had to move to a Kindle because otherwise I'd have to, move out of a house. So, yeah, I really do covet books. I covet words for sure.
See, I'm too much of a collector because I get having to read on a Kindle because, for some people it's, the eyesight or they get headaches. But I just like having physical books around just in case I need them one day.
I understand that too. I mean, hey, we're all preparing for the apocalypse in one form or another.
if,
So,
if I need the dictionary, it's over there.
exactly.
So whereabouts did you grow up? Did you grow up in a rural area? Were you in a city?
I had quite a diverse childhood. I was born in a very small town in Missouri. It was probably about 900 people at the time.
Wow.
My parents divorced when I was quite young, and that led me to a childhood that was constantly varied because my mom lived in one city, my dad in another. Both of them moved a couple of times, so I just had a really interesting childhood, multiple states, multiple economic backgrounds, multiple types of culture. And I was just very comfortable in all of it. I really loved it. I think it's similar to reading in that I'm just always looking for what I can learn no matter where I am. Oh, I'm so sorry. That was my alarm that I was about to have a meeting with you. Let me make sure that's turned off.
You made it.
Yes, exactly. Well done, me. But yes, sorry for the intense intrusion. But yeah, my childhood, I think I've only really recently started to appreciate the levels of diversity in it because I see that so much in culture now of those who have not had any experience besides their core experience and how much fear that can lead them to have. And anyone I know who travels, and I mean even weekend trips, I mean take a day trip somewhere, but just get out of your normal day-to-day environment. It just increases your happiness so much. It increases your spirit, your understanding. It widens your mind in such a gorgeous and fun way. So, I mean, anybody who is going through a rough time, and I know it's kind of a privileged thing to say, but I think travel, and I literally mean go to a different neighborhood, just go
Yeah.
to a new coffee shop, just mix it up so that you're not stuck in the same rut. And of course, if you have the funds, then make it even bigger, go to a city you've never been to, or, as big as you can attempt, try something you've never tried, but there's that kind of experience is not budget prohibitive unless you're trying to try really extraordinary things. Because the main thing is just getting yourself to have new experiences, take a pottery class or, you know, start to train for a marathon, like all of these things that feel crazy when you say them out loud if that's not your comfort zone. But wow, what you learn along the way, even if it's not something you stick with.
Right, and I agree. Because when most people hear travel, immediately you think, going to another country. But just within the United States, I live in South Carolina. If I go to Florida, it's a completely different world, and that's like
Yes,
a
yes.
6 hour drive. It's really not that crazy to just go for a weekend, and then yeah, like you said, you just experience something different.
Yeah, it just opens your mind and you realize like, oh, I had no idea I loved that food. Or, go to a one of the I heard this great thing the other day that I've just been saying irritatingly, I'm sure I've been saying it so much. But I read this quote that was something like, you don't need anything from Target. Just go to a museum. Your body just wants to look at something different, you know? And I think that's half the time. Like we're just we're looking to, have a flood of new come into our lives. And we don't have to spend money for that. We just have to look at the resources that are available. And I mean, extraordinary museums exist everywhere. And I mean, a craft fair on the weekend. Like you just never know what's going to spark for you, but it's that you're looking for the spark. And that I think is a primal thing for every human being is to keep that spark alive.
Well said. Just curious because I see it over your shoulder there. Do you write as well? I see the typewriter.
Oh, I love antiques. I
Yeah.
love bits and pieces of all kinds of things. I do consider myself a writer. Uh, I hesitate on that, but I'm starting to really try to own it. I hesitate because my sister is a writer and she's a beautifully gifted writer. And I always, when you're kids, you're like, that's her thing. Mine is this other thing. But again, I love words. So when something hits me, yeah, it's kind of unstoppable when I really have something to say. And the other thing I would say is I'm I sort of used to not realize what a big thing this was for me, but I am a constant journaler. And I don't mean like a diary. I'm not necessarily keeping track of what happens in my day, but I am always, always, always trying to learn more about myself and why I function the way I do, what I'm happy with and what I'm not, what I'd like to change and how. I just think it feels like space exploration to me. Like it's
Hmm.
just the new frontier of just really understanding how you function and why you do what you do and how to amplify what you like and how to change what you don't. So
Is that something you've always done, like since you were young, or is that relatively new?
certainly more and more and more the older I get,
Mm.
but it's something I kind of always did, though it took sort of it. I think in high school, I my form of journaling in high school, which I'm so happy I did this. It's such a gift to look back on. But the way I would, quote unquote quote journal is I would just collect quotes from anything I wanted to keep, whether it was something my friend said or something I heard on TV or something I read in a book. And I had hundreds of pages over the course of probably 10 years or something. I mean, hundreds, where I look back and I really did collect amazing things because it would be like the funny joke or the memory you would have forgotten otherwise. But it was also really interesting, again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, just seeing what sparked for me at that age and what still resonates or what I've totally outgrown, or, what just suddenly makes me remember a moment that otherwise I would have no recollection of at this point in my life. So, yeah, that really did serve me well.
Yeah. Now, that since you're just talking about it, I wish I would have done that because it's just like pictures. Sometimes I'll look at a picture and I have no recollection of like the moment or taking the picture until you actually look at it.
Yes,
Hmm.
yes, exactly. And just, it's the wild part about growing up is what was incredibly important to us at one point that it could not be less important now, or vice versa. The things we just didn't put value in that now are such touchstones for us. So again, just, being human is so damn interesting.
Yeah.
It's just wild.
You mentioned that your sister writes. Just growing up, was your family more artistically inclined? Do you think that's where your roots come from, pursuing acting and whatnot?
Well, so acting was not in my family, but creativity was.
Mm.
On the surface, if you look at my family history, it was basically all farmers and preachers. That's kind of, if you go back far, that's kind of what you're going to find. But equally, all of them were folk artists of some kind. My grandmother was an exquisite seamstress. My mom loves to paint. These are not their chosen professions, but they were something that soothed their soul, gave them a creative outlet. And it's something that I just think is vitally important that we are all honoring the creativity inside of us. And I think that really does need to be fed certainly multiple times a week, if not every day. And it's different for every person. But I mean, human beings, we are creators. We're creating ourselves every day. If you're in a business, you're creating your business. If you are decorating your home, you're creating your safe space. Like the outfit you put on every day is communicating something and it's soothing you in some way or hiding you in some way or amplifying you in some way. And all of that is, it's very cool to unpack and be part of and just figure out, what is it that is my form of communication right now and that is really scratching that itch because even though a lot of people don't describe themselves as creative, I've never met a person who isn't. It's just, again, part of being human.
Right. We all have something to express, and listeners will know I've said this a million times, so they're probably sick of it. But I do write short stories, and
Nice.
I have no interest in being the next Stephen King, though I would welcome it. Uh, but the reason I do it is because I enjoy doing it, and just how we were talking about pictures. I'm going to be having a kid soon, and the way I look at it is, one day, after I'm long gone, if they what was in Dad's head, what was he thinking about one certain day? They could read this story, and it's like a little slice of immortality, almost something like that.
Yes. Oh, that's
That's
beautiful. Well,
yeah.
congratulations on the baby, but
Thank you.
also congratulations on the multiple babies that you're writing.
Yeah. So, just sticking with your childhood a bit, which records were spinning around the house?
Ooh, so for reasons I have no understanding of, uh, when I was I can remember this so vividly. I would get off the bus after kindergarten. It dropped me off right at the front of my house, and I would walk into the house, and whether my mom or my dad was home, I insisted that Donna Summer's Hot Stuff had to be played every day. Amen. I mean, it was probably about 10 years ago that I really re-listened to that song and was kind of shocked by the lyrics because I hear it from my 5-year-old self.
Yeah.
That's, yeah, but that's also something that I love so much is how utterly oblivious I was to the meaning. But man, did I love that track for some reason when I was 5 years old. But yeah, I don't know. I have those musical touchstones throughout my life. Like I can remember the summer when my dad was endlessly playing Stevie Wonder's Higher Love,
Hmm.
Or, my mom had a Tina Turner summer where she just couldn't get enough of that. But, I have very diverse taste in music. Again, it's kind of like books. It's whatever just sparks for me and feels good at the moment. I mean, talking about creativity, it's like back in the day, putting playlists together and, making a mixtape and,
Yeah.
like, the science of it of, oh, it has to be perfect of what's going to lead into the next one. But what I love about those moments is you're so trying to honor yourself or the person you're making it for.
Hmm.
Just like, really, I'm trying to savor this moment in time of, nothing goes on here unless I love it. And I think that's a philosophy we need to always be working on.
Yeah. And just like smells and music are the two time machines that we have. If you smell
Yes.
that pie that your grandma used to make, you can almost like feel like you're in the room, or you hear a certain song, it takes you back to whatever age you are when you heard it, and it's just even for a couple of seconds, it's just a very strange feeling.
It is, but it's so extraordinary, just the way our brains work, just the way things get connected. And I love that, how you can walk past a bakery and just something, some cinnamon or something comes out and you are almost weeping, but in a great way because you're time traveling, you're, as you said, it's how we time travel.
Now, did you ever pick up any instruments or anything?
Oh, badly. It was, yeah. So I was a dancer all my life. So I would say I'm musical in the sense that my body really understands music. But my mind is less satisfied with trying to play. I played clarinet for 3 years, and I technically played piano for probably 6 or 7, but it was like, I mean, I played for 20 minutes between lessons. I was not someone who was drawn to the rehearsal process, the music process, where you couldn't get me off of a dance floor, a dance studio. I was there, it's my mom telling me it's time for bed when I just wanted to practice just 5 more minutes, which of course meant 90 minutes. And, it's that my mom was quite a good piano player, and it was important for her to introduce that to us. But it's just one of the things where we were very different. And I love that I have that experience in my background, but it's not one of the things that has stuck. It's one of those languages I wish I spoke, but I just simply don't.
Yeah, you and me both. That's one of my biggest regrets about growing up is skipping over the music class.
Yeah.
Because I think when I went into junior high, you got the signups right, and the band was right next to PE, and I was just like,
Yeah.
I'm going. I want to play. I'd rather just play basketball or something.
Right.
And now I have all friends that are sort of musicians and still trying to learn the musical alphabet is like hieroglyphics.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like that's what the triangle was invented for. Like, I think I could do that.
Yeah. Now, were you a big concert goer at all?
I've been incredibly lucky in my life. I It's so funny. I'm not a person who has ever sought out concerts, but it's because it's one of these ways in which I have been lucky without realizing it until quite far into my life. I just had all of these opportunities come to me where I was surrounded by live music for most of my life. A chunk of my life, I lived in this crazy town called Branson, Missouri, which while I lived there was the music capital, basically. We had, I think, something like 42 live theaters.
Wow.
And the crazy part about that town at that time was, and when I say live theaters, I mean like 2,000 seat theaters. But the town itself was only about 5,000 people. They just had like 10 million tourists a year. It was bananas. But the cool thing was anyone who lived there could go to any show for free if there was space because they like to have the seats filled. So, I mean, we would just go to shows all the time because, well, because it's free. So why not? And so, that's another way in which I was introduced to all kinds of music that at my age I normally wouldn't have been because these were mostly artists that were at the stage in their life where they just didn't have the energy for touring any longer. So having a set stage they could come to every night was great. So it's a lot of artists that I might have heard their names, but I wouldn't have known their music. But you're there with a 40-piece orchestra and, just incredible talent. I think that's another thing in my life is that I've just always been surrounded by talented people, which anybody could say at any time. It's just whether or not people are giving themselves permission to explore and express that. But I was definitely surrounded by people who were doing exactly that. And, when people around you are doing that, it gives you ideas that it's okay and that you can sort of dream big and all of that.
Yeah, well said. Um, so, formative films and TV shows that you grew up on, what pops into your mind?
Oh, I'm just not going to try to be cool. I'm going to tell you the real ones.
Please.
So the first two movies that I ever saw was E.T. and the movie Annie. And I really loved E.T., but it made me sad. But Annie lit me on fire in the best way. I was obsessed with Annie. I had never seen dancing like that. And I guess I just came out of the womb wanting to dance. And I mean, that movie to this day, I mean, I rewatched it maybe 2 years ago or something, and the choreography is unbelievable. There's all these little kids that are so acrobatic. I just don't even think that it would be allowed on sets today. It was so dangerous, but really incredibly cool. And it was the perfect introduction to Carol Burnett, who I just think is one of the coolest human beings ever on the planet. It's such an extraordinary role for her. I'm not a huge musical person. I do love and appreciate musicals, but it was more about the style and just the performances were so great. And I mean, honestly, hands down, it was Carol Burnett. Like she was just so delightful. So that was I mean, I would watch that movie again. And remember back in the day when HBO would only play like 3 or 4 movies a month, but they would play them like 400 times each?
Yeah.
That was me. So it would have been like that kind of thing. And then within my family, I mean, like I remember Steel Magnolias was a big one when that came out. Again, because of the dancing, I was obsessed with Dirty Dancing. My mind couldn't imagine it. It came out right at the time when I like, oh, boys are cool too. And, just sort of seeing the world in a different light. So I love that. It was escapism. It's all the same. That I felt the same way about movies that I did with books. I wanted to see old movies and new movies and different genres and try to figure out how one person could be so many different things successfully. And I would believe them in this movie and in this movie. And, that really just lit me up in a way that I wasn't conscious of, but was definitely there.
Now, this is a question I like to ask everyone, and you could take it, real world or fictional, but what scared you when you were a kid?
Uh, um, I was scared of being how do I say this in a way that I'm going to get it across in the right way? I never wanted to be the problem child. Like I was a kid that was constantly looking for solutions. I was responsible beyond my age, probably really hyper vigilant. I think that happens with a lot of children of divorce, and especially as an eldest child. I was very much a caretaker for my younger siblings, and I mean, honestly, inappropriately attempting to be a caretaker for my parents, like just again, what I think happens to a lot of kids in that situation. So I was never the one who wanted to go crazy in some way or felt that I needed a release in a way that might be considered naughty. My release was always through my creativity
Hmm.
and, just constantly finding ways, no matter where we lived, no matter what our financial circumstances what were. If we couldn't afford dance classes, I was gathering kids from the neighborhood and I was the choreographer and we were doing shows in the backyard. And, it was that sort of thing. There was just always an element of play and creativity and I mean, I liked also being in charge. That was nice. So,
You mentioned earlier that you were dancing from a young age. So now, when you were in high school, did you start doing stage plays and things like that? Is that how it sort of started?
not at all. I have young actors who ask me for advice, which I'm happy to give, but my particular situation is kind of unrepeatable. It was just an absolute fluke set of circumstances that showed up. My first dance class, I was 2 years old, which of course just means basically you're standing there in a cute costume. That's all that it takes. But I did love it and continued throughout my lifetime. And when I was in high school, I had moved a couple of times, and there were 2 years of my life when I lived in a county where it was like not flash dance, footloose. It was like footloose, where dancing was not allowed. And so that was kind of like my mind was, you know, kind of exploding from trying to understand that one and trying to figure out who my identity was if I didn't have that label, kind of a thing. But acting came to me, it came to me in a fluke where I was going to get my senior portraits done for the yearbook. And the photographer that I went to was also hosting an acting class on the weekend. And I wasn't particularly interested or not, but I was of an age, 16 years old. He was a grown man who was good at sales, and I didn't know how to say no yet. And so he upsold me to get the bigger package that included the acting class. And I wasn't mad about it. I just did not yet have the words to be able to sort of, have my own voice at that moment. But it turned out to be a kind of miracle because even though it was in this tiny, small town, it turns out he had worked in Los Angeles, and the class was actually being taught by casting directors from Los Angeles that had flown to the Midwest to teach this class. And they were using current on TV material. And that's what we used for the acting class, which I was brand new to, but I did have presence and I had a lot of emotional intelligence and I just sort of got it. I didn't necessarily have a lot of skill and certainly didn't understand any of the technological part of it, but I enjoyed it. I knew what it meant to have presence and to tell a story. And very strangely, and the fluke of all flukes, uh, the class ended. It was a 2-day workshop, and they recorded the whole thing and they took it back to Los Angeles. And that Wednesday, I got offered the role of one of the sides that we were using as the material for the class. And they'd been searching for this role for weeks and couldn't find the person. And they all, all the people in charge loved what I did. But that did not move forward because my parents 100% thought it was a scam. Maybe even I did a little bit too, because that's bananas. It just
Yeah,
sounds
yeah.
crazy. And, it would have been like, okay, you're 16, but next week you're moving to New York. And, like it was just a non-starter. But knowing that it wasn't until that moment of knowing, like, wait a minute, you could make a living at this. Because I already knew, like, most dancers, their career is over by the time they're 23 or 24 just because of injuries. And even dancers that are working don't really make a living that often unless, for a while maybe they do, but it's a very difficult road. But when I realized, oh, I could maybe actually do this, that's when it lit a fire under me. And so for my final year of high school, I just dove deep into anything I could get my hands on that was acting related to know as much as I could, and then moved to LA shortly after graduation.
Wow. So you say you grow up in this small town in Missouri. Was that those first few days, first few weeks in LA, was it a culture shock or were you fine?
It wasn't at all. I mean, well, that's not true. It probably absolutely was, but I just was oblivious to it because I was so happy to be there. It felt so right. It's that thing where when you are met by the thing that feels perfect, you just ignore anything that would take away from how beautiful it is. My laser focus was on all the parts of it that were working. So I mean, I was very lucky in that I had some family here that lived about an hour and a half outside of Los Angeles. So that's where I first landed. But it meant that immediately I was driving 2 hours each way every day for auditions. And it was insane behavior, but that's how much I loved it. Is I even loved the drive. I was driving at least 4 hours a day, and I loved it because that was the price I had to pay to be able to pursue this thing I loved. And so I felt so empowered and so just fully that I was making the right decision. And, there's not a lot of times in life when that level of certainty comes to you.
Right.
I think it happens like right before you're going to propose to someone or, the moment you hold your baby, this experience you're about to have. But there are only a few things in life where it feels so exclusively right that if you don't allow yourself to savor that, you're crazy. And, I certainly didn't have much knowledge at the time, but somehow my instinct was or maybe I was just so too foolhardy to understand some of the trappings of such a big move and such a life change. But I really just enjoyed every second of it. I loved learning Los Angeles, and it was absolutely magical to me that in Los Angeles, there's something like 180 languages spoken. And that just, I mean, that fact was so mind-blowing to me and I just loved it. I love that I can get any kind of food I want and I can go to any kind of festival I want and just really immerse myself with all kinds of fabulous people. And I was also lucky in that I had good enough instincts to avoid terrible people. I was never someone who was seduced by people pretending to have power or people saying, oh, but I can do this for you. I was very good at seeing through that, or perhaps I was just lucky, but I was, it just seemed very clear to me that my instincts were working, so why should I trust yours?
Right, right.
So, so yeah, I just, not to say there hasn't been pitfalls and ups and downs. I mean, like everybody, it's a roller coaster, it's an ebb and flow, but it's also just really exciting because it's something that when I am working, when it is working, there's still nothing I like better. It's just really satisfying.
So just curious, when you first arrive in LA, do you remember the very first audition that you went to?
Oh, I wish I did, but I actually, I don't know which show it would have been, but I mean, I was of course very young, but I also looked even younger. So everything I was auditioning for was like uh 15-year-old so and so on some teeny bopper show. I remember that I auditioned for the company was called Saban, and they really took a shine to me. But I auditioned and auditioned. They brought me in, I'm not kidding, they brought me in maybe 19 times and just constantly to producers, straight to producers. And they always liked me, but for whatever reason, I was not the right thing. And then finally, they gave me a very small role. And if I'm not mixing up stories at this late date, my God, the it's that's a long time ago. But the first official job that I ever had was kind of tragic because it was on this show called Sweet Valley High. So again, I was playing like a 15-year-old cheerleader, and my big first job, my I had one line, and my line was, "Hi, Todd." I mean, big, right? Like you can feel it's momentous.
You still remember
Oh, I do, I do. But
it?
here's the reason I remember it. It's not because, I mean, of course, I would like to tell you that my performance was epic and unforgettable. But what actually happened is they were running very late and they never got coverage of my face. They just filmed the over the shoulder of talking to Todd. So I couldn't, and I somehow, even though I was so new to the business, I was smart enough to understand like they have not filmed my face. So I couldn't even tell anybody I got this job because I didn't want people to tune in and all they saw was the back of my head, the side of my shoulder. I'm sure I gave good shoulder, but
Oh no. So I see that one of your earliest credits is from Saved by the Bell, the new
yeah,
class. What are your
it
memories of
was.
that?
Uh, well, it was very dramatic because I got to dump an ice cream sundae on a guy that had done me wrong. So, that was pretty epic. It actually was a little bit scary because you could only do it once. So we had to, if there were multiple people in that scene, I think two other girls and I, plus the guy who had done us all wrong. And if that got messed up, they did not have replacements for the wardrobe and, all that stuff. So we were very much told it had to be perfect. And, it was a very new experience. It was a live studio audience, which was, I think, maybe the first time I had had that experience. So you're on a stage and everything is timed. And uh, yeah, it was, I mean, honestly, what I really remember from that show is they put me in the most terrible outfit and they gave me makeup where I looked like I was 35 years old. Like I was wearing so much makeup. And it was weird. I like walked in as an 18-year-old girl. And then after I went through hair and makeup and wardrobe, I was wearing like orange suede pants and an orange button-up top. Like I don't even know who would wear that, but like not a high school kid. But anyway, I guess that's what sticks with me, the aesthetic stuff.
Now, were you a fan of the original show growing up? Was that in the back of your mind at all that it was sort of
Oh
that's
yeah.
just
I mean, just yeah, to
yeah.
work on something where I knew the title felt like a very big deal.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I can't say that I was like a fan. I wasn't someone who was like obsessed with the storylines or anything, but I was certainly, it was always on every Saturday morning. Like it was just pop culture then, like there were certain things back in the day. It's what we miss now. It's what's beautiful about now, but also what's crazy about now is we used to have these massive cultural experiences where everybody sort of knew the same thing. And now it's so diversified that it's beautiful because everybody can find what they want. But it also means we have fewer things that we're directly connecting over because you have there's an unlimited amount of things you can watch at any time. Where back then, it was appointment television. You planned your life around prime time and Saturday mornings.
Yeah, the rise of the streaming services is sort of a double-edged sword. Just like I stated
It
there,
is.
it's just too much out there to consume. Uh, so when it comes in retrospect, now, would you say that the audition for Xena was it typical? Is it run-of-the-mill
Um,
audition?
no, not at all. I mean, it's so funny. I really had no idea how big the show is, what it was. It just none of that. But it's only because it was so big for me so quickly that I even probably really clocked the audition because people always want to know that story. So I really understood it deeply very quickly. Uh, and it kind of drives fans crazy sometimes because the truth is, I turned that audition down multiple times, not because I didn't like the show, but because literally I didn't have time. Back in the day, that was when I was at my height of auditioning. I could have, not kidding, I could have 10 auditions in a day. And that was when you had to drive to all of them. That wasn't even self tapes at home. And sometimes there were moments when you had to sacrifice one because you just literally couldn't get there. And so eventually I found out that I was playing Xena's daughter, but that was top secret when I auditioned. What I was actually auditioning for was her nemesis. And the way television worked back then, they never cast people that looked similar when they were, enemies. So I was fully expecting that they would cast a blonde or a redhead or an African American or something like that so that there would be a real difference. And I looked, I was blue-eyed and brunette and Caucasian, just like Lucy. And so I just thought, I have no chance, no choice, no, I have no chance. So my choice is easy. I'm gonna, not go to this audition. But they apparently looked for a few weeks and didn't find what they wanted. So they invited me back in, or invited me in, I guess, for the first time. And this time I was available. So I went in, still thought I had no chance because the details hadn't changed any. But then I got a call back, and then I went in for the call back, and all the producers were there, and they were asking me if I could fight, and I'd never fought at all. But I said I could. I'm a dancer, so I pick up choreography quickly, and I wasn't scared of fighting. And then I got the role, and it wasn't until I had signed contracts I had some scripts delivered. So New Zealand was magical. It was nothing short of paradise, truly. It was, oh, just the sweetest people ever. Absolutely gorgeous, but in a way that I don't know how to say it except to say it wasn't intimidating. It was familiar because it was like rolling hillsides and beautiful beaches. But the amazing thing about New Zealand is it's all close. That I remember at the time hearing this phrase that New Zealand was God's blueprint for all of Earth because everything you can find on Earth you can find in these tiny islands. You can have glaciers and sand dunes and white sand and black sand and everything, which is why it was so great to film there because it could look like so many places and you drive half an hour one direction and it's a completely different not only visually is it different, but it can even be, like your weather can be different, that sort of a thing. But it was gorgeous. I don't even think I really took it in to the degree that I want to say that I did, purely because I was so busy. The first two episodes I did were almost entirely focused on my character. So I was working nonstop. Plus, I had wardrobe fittings and makeup tests and jet lag, and just trying to find my feet and remember people's real names plus their character names and where's the bathroom, just those normal human things. But it was absolutely exquisite. The people were so nice. I remember at the time, and of course the world changes, but I just remember being so utterly charmed because the big story on the news every night, there was this crazy story that was happening about this crime that was sweeping neighborhoods. And the big crime that was happening was a peeping Tom.
Oh no.
And I just remember thinking like, oh, that's cute, And there was some sort of like fruit basket or something when I arrived at the hotel. But within that gift basket was also the tourist directory, the one that is put out by the government. And I'm flipping through it on that first night or that first week, certainly. And as I'm looking through it, it says, again, promoted by the government, created and distributed by the government. And it says, if you are low on funds, try hitchhiking. And I just thought, what? But, it was that kind of culture, certainly at that time, where it was, I'm sure a local farmer will take you over the hill and then you can try you know what I mean? Like it was
Yeah,
just so sweet. And, this was before Lord of the Rings and all of that. So it was still kind of a more quiet enclave than certainly than you would find today. But yeah, it was special. It was just a really special experience.
that's awesome. So, what would you say? What was your first impression upon meeting the gang? Meeting Lucy, Renee, and Sam Raimi was around. I'm sure. What was that like?
Ted Raimi was around. I
Ted.
didn't get
Okay.
a chance to meet Sam. Yes. I mean, it, pardon me, it fit me like a glove. Uh, it was everything I had hoped acting would be. It was dramatic. All the costumes were handmade. There were hundreds of extras. It felt like really big movie making. Honestly, it felt like it then more than it does now, even on giant movie sets, because now so much is CGI, and back then it was so practical. And the fire wasn't CGI. We had real fire, and you know, everybody was on horseback, and like yeah, the weapons were either were plastic or something like that. So, but we were real. It was just everything that I had really hoped acting would be when you got a great role. And then on top of that, all the people were great. They felt very, and I certainly don't mean, I don't mean this to not amplify anyone else, but it felt like, oh, these New Zealanders are very much like Midwesterners, where hard work is appreciated. We reach a goal. There's no complaining. You pull up your bootstraps and you get it done. And those were my people. Like, I was whatever they would ask me to do, I was happy to do because my goal is always the finished product. Like, and it was just lovely. And the person that I spent the most time with those first couple of weeks was Kevin Smith, who played Aries, who was just an absolutely lovely human being. And I tell this joke where some people might be familiar that when you have racehorses, there's this thing that sometimes racehorses can be very skittish. They're high strung. They're just ready to bolt. And so sometimes they'll put a goat in with them, like a comfort goat, to keep them calm in their stalls. And I sort of made a joke that first week that like Kevin was my comfort goat because like anytime I was about to get panicky, he would like talk to me about his kids and like something like that kept me from realizing how much pressure was actually on my shoulders. Because if that didn't work, that's like they were spending a lot of money every day, and if I was terrible, it would have been a really bad thing. So, so it was kind of it was a lovely experience all around. And Lucy and Renee are the best. Like Lucy has just this, I mean, they both have such presence, but Lucy also has like a, kind of naughty sense of humor, and Renee is quieter, but man, is she like focused on the work and just, you just know that she's going to give you 100% every time. And, the leads of a show, they determine the attitude of the entire production. So if you have people that are, unhappy or lazy or mad or whatever, that's going to trickle down to the whole production. And instead, you had people that were like eager for this to be as good as possible. And, every day we were fighting the sun because so much of the filming was outdoors. So we had to get things before the sun went down. So, there was not a lot of time to be dragging our feet. Not that there is ever on a set, but certainly with that one, we were so time crunched by the sunset that it was really important that everybody just kept that momentum. And I loved it. Yeah, they were my people for sure.
As you mentioned during the audition, you kind of sort of didn't understand like how popular and the scope of the show. When did that change?
Well, it changed. So my first trip to New Zealand, I was in 3 episodes, and then there was a break. It was the end of the season, so there was a break until the next season started. And I didn't even know at that time that I was coming back for the next season. I mean, story-wise, it would make sense, but I wasn't guaranteed that because again, if I had been terrible or terrible to work with, they certainly weren't going to put up with that. But when I wrapped those 3 episodes, but before they aired, I had already been invited to a fan convention, which I technically knew existed, but I certainly had no experience with it and didn't really understand how big that was. But that's when I started to understand is like strangers care about this character they've never even met. They've never seen her yet. Like they somehow care enough that they already know bits and pieces of information and already are wanting pictures, which again don't even exist yet. And, that's when I sort of had a clue. And, that while I was on the show, it was the biggest show in the world. And, it was on almost 200 countries. And my mind kind of, couldn't even comprehend that because in the United States, it had a big following, but it wasn't considered a big show the way it was in other countries. So I was sort of in this in between space where I absolutely understood the character of Xena in terms of her, like the zeitgeist and what that image was. But I just didn't understand at that moment how broad the appeal was and how different groups of people got different things out of it. Different cultures understood it in different ways. And of course, it took years for all of us to understand the importance that it had in terms of representation on television, in terms of personal empowerment and female empowerment. And it's funny because this year is the 30th anniversary, and it really feels like culture is finally
Yeah.
able to really give it its due. But it took that long because back in the day, it was very much brushed off as being very silly, very campy. And it had those parts to it, certainly. But it was also really groundbreaking television. It paved the way for now, 3 decades worth of female leads that could be different than what had been presented before. So, I mean, it's something where when the show first ended, truthfully, it was hard for all of us to get further work because it had kind of become a bit of a cultural joke in some circles. And so we all thought, or at least I shouldn't speak for anyone else, but I certainly thought like, oh, I'm going to be walking right into some other fabulous thing. And it took a while it was like, it was kind of like suddenly you were wearing an outfit that was no longer in style, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And, I would have casting directors that would just absolutely dismiss the show. And hilariously, those same casting directors, like 5 years later, enough time had passed where I would be in to see them and they would be like, like it was a dirty secret. By the way, I love that show. And I'm like, well, me too. Why didn't you hire me before?
It's like you and half the world did.
Yeah, exactly. But it's funny. Everything finds its time and place. And, like all of the opinions are true. Was it campy? Absolutely. Was it silly? Of course. But was it extraordinary? Absolutely. It had all kinds of things going on with it. And again, every person got something different out of it, depending on what they were looking for.
It's funny that you mentioned sort of Xena setting the tone for female leads because I write for this this large website that's named Comic Book Resource, and I was assigned a Xena topic recently, and I mentioned that in the article that typically when you're talking about '90s television, people point to Buffy, which I love
Sure.
Buffy. No shade to Buffy, but Xena was 2 years before Buffy.
And
So yeah.
even more specifically, I truly think Buffy would not have existed without Xena because I think Xena was the gamble.
Hmm.
Xena was, can there be a female action lead? And when it turns out, hell yes, it can, then, that paved the way for, because, and it's a business. It all boils down to money. And people were afraid that women would not be taken seriously, would not be supported by an audience if they were in a role that the audience was not used to seeing them in. And now we think that's a ridiculous conversation
Hmm.
because good television is, good programming is good programming. We all want to inhabit all of these different parts of our personality through the shows that we're watching. And yet, it was absolutely foreign in that moment. And so I mean, that's one of the lovely things that we've seen about, perception growing over time. And yeah, so yes, I'm very proud to have been part of that for sure.
I wanted to throw this at you because when I spoke with Renee, obviously her and Lucy spent a great deal of time together. So I can't remember the specifics, but Renee was staying in New Zealand. Lucy was traveling. So, and Renee didn't want to come back to the States, I think it was. And Lucy was like, well, you could just stay at my house.
Mm.
So she stays at Lucy's house. And Renee says that she would never stay there again because she had several ghost encounters at Lucy's house in New Zealand. And that she said Lucy was very, kind of superstitious. So did you have any sort of inkling into that? Did you know about that?
I did not know anything about that. I've only been to Lucy's house once. It was, I think, the very first week I was working there. There was a big barbecue that everybody went to, and I just loved her house. It's so funny. I just had a similar conversation about this recently with another friend who was just like terrified of the idea of ghosts. And that's not my belief system. I absolutely do believe in quote unquote ghosts, but I don't assume any of them are evil. I am like, come join the party, like enjoy the barbecue. I would
Mm-hmm.
not be freaked out by that whatsoever. You know, I I really believe we're all energy, and I don't really know what happens afterwards, but energy still exists. It just goes into a different form. So that side note, that's not an invitation for a bunch of folks to visit me at this moment. But I guess what I'm saying is that's just not something I've ever been scared of. I think it's really cool. I also have personally never had a paranormal experience. So I think for better or worse, that's just not something I'm particularly attuned to. So, hey, maybe there's three people behind me right now and I'm just not picking up on it. But even if they're there, I trust that they're here to protect me and hang out with me and that it's good energy. Like I have no time to spend on anything but that. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. So sadly, I missed out on Lucy's ghosts.
She's like, of course Xena's house would be haunted. So, Adrian, I know you do your fair share of voice work as well. Was it your intention to sort of make your way into that realm, or did it happen organically?
Totally organic. It wasn't a specific goal I had. I was certainly open to it, but it was just one of my managers, I think it was at the time, just said, "Hey, you want to try this?" And I was like, "Yeah, we'll see if it works. I'm open to it." And I was slightly intimidated because my mental idea of what voiceover work was you had to be someone who could do 50 random crazy character voices, and that's definitely not what I do. But of course, I can do 50 different versions of myself, in different circumstances and, with different backgrounds to the character and all of that. And I really do love it. I just love building characters. Of course, if I'm honest, I also love it because it's easier in terms of there's no hair, there's no makeup, there's no wardrobe. You can just show up. And I mean, you always joke you can show up in your pajamas, which of course I've never done, but I suppose it would be possible. But I love that it's another kind of storytelling. Like to me, all of this, honestly, everything to me is storytelling because I think as humans, we tell ourselves stories to understand ourselves. And whether that's literally in stories, or whether that's in music or in art or in cartoons or in film and television, we're all just constantly telling ourselves stories and telling each other stories, trying to understand what it is to be human, trying to understand the period of history we're in, or the periods of history we have witnessed, or that we somehow feel a reflection to. So all of it to me is very similar. And I love the fact that when I do voice work, I potentially get to do characters that there's absolutely no way I could do on screen because they do look very different from me, or they're not even human. And it's another way that I get to play and another way I get to tell a story. And yeah, all of that lights me up. I love it.
Best acting advice that you've been given and who gave it to you?
Ooh, I'm gonna have to think on that for a second. I will tell you what I think is the best advice that I give people who want to be actors. The first thing I say to everyone is get very clear with yourself on, do you want to be an actor or do you want to be famous? Because those are two very different things. And they're both valid. You want what you want, and it's totally cool, whatever you want. But you have to understand that they are such different experiences. You might become an actor who also has fame, but that is still a very different experience than someone who just is craving a lot of attention. And I think that line gets even more blurred in today's society with all of the social media outlets, because you have a lot of people who are making so much money, but they are doing it by, not all of them, but there's a certain percentage that are doing it by sharing parts of themselves that I think they will regret eventually. And as an actor, even though your best performances are very raw, it's still behind the lens of a character. And so there's a separation between the sacred you and the sacredness of the character. And so I really think that's something that you have to navigate very, very carefully. Um, I wish that I had a beautiful answer for you immediately. I mean, it's silly stuff that's coming to mind. It's stuff like, uh, heroes don't blink, like learning that was a really big thing. Like, oh, whenever you're playing a heroic character, you should literally never blink on camera. And, that's a tricky thing, but it's a psychological thing that uh, blinking is vulnerable. So you can
Mm.
blink when you're the victim, or you can blink when you are, even if you're the hero, you can blink, but only if it's in a moment of vulnerability. But little tricks like that are, or another one, like this is actually a fantastic piece of advice that I tell a lot of actors and creators, that the difference between acting for theater and acting for film is, or I should say, just acting for a camera. When you are acting for theater, whatever you are doing has to reach the back row. So whether that's voice, whether that's, whatever your performance is, even if it's silent, has to reach the back row. But when you are acting on camera, the camera can read your thoughts. So you have to be very aware of your relationship with the camera and understand when you need to pull back, when you need to push forward. It's one of the parts of the job I love the most because I consider that to be a dance. And you're in a dance with the other characters, you're in a dance with the director, but you're really in a dance with whatever the technology is that you're using, and really understanding what you need to do for that. And it's different for different things. It was different on film versus digital. It's different in mocap versus regular filming. It's a very different thing. And you know, I think it behooves every actor to be as smart as they can about the technology. So really understand different lenses and what the framing is, and understand what your superpowers are. Understand it's what I call the acting you do for free. And that is, when you walk in the room, what do people assume about you? You don't have to play that up. It's just right there. And it may have literally nothing to do with your real self, but it's how you are automatically perceived because of cultural norms or stereotypes. And it's how you do your hair or your makeup, or how you dress or how you walk, what your posture is. all of those things tell a story that you need to be aware of. And all of those things need to be dialed up or down depending on the type of character that you're playing and the what the where the mic is placed and what the lighting is, all of those things are all part of it. And it's really great because you are such an important piece when you're on camera, but you are one of 50 pieces it takes to make that work. So you can't ever think you're the most important piece. You're just the most overt piece. And it takes all the things to tell that story. It's the music and the lighting and the makeup and the wardrobe and your co-stars and all of those things that together make this magic that where we get to tell stories.
I really like the heroes don't blink thing because the eyes can tell so much, even if you're not consciously aware of it. And when you said that, I just
Yeah.
started going through my mind, and I was like, yeah, yeah, that does work.
Yeah.
And
Oh, you watch any big like I think that really started big time in the 80s, but yeah, like you watch any Bruce Willis movie or something like that, like he doesn't blink in a whole movie,
yeah, it was Gary Oldman. I was watching one of his interviews recently, and he was giving a tip that he used like when he has to play an anti-hero or a badass type character. He
Yeah.
says he'll raise the head and then the eyes after. And it was
Oh,
so
yeah.
effective. It was just like, oh yeah, that's the move.
But what's funny is the female version of that is the seduction. Raise my head up and then
Yeah,
raise my eyes.
yeah,
It's very calculated of, exactly what energy I'm bringing to this moment.
yeah, yeah. Well, Adrian, just to put a bow on this thing here, is there anything on the horizon that you want to share? Anything in the pipeline you want to throw out there?
I do this is where it gets awkward because I do have several things in the pipeline I'm incredibly excited about, but so few that I can talk about yet. I can talk about them vaguely, and I can say I have a really big video game that I'm so excited about, but video games take forever, so it's a minimum of a year from now, but it could probably be 2 to 3 years before this comes out. But I'm playing a fantastic villain that I'm so excited about, so that's going to be fun. I also have a an upcoming film that I'm doing that we are hoping will be potentially the beginning of a much bigger project, but it's people that I have worked with before. I absolutely love them. It's a story so close to my heart. It has it's set in space, it is set in the future, but has a lot to say about civilization in the moment that we're in. And it's going to be fun and it's going to be raucous. And I'm just really looking forward to that one. I'd also love to give a shout out. Some delightful friends and I, several years ago, we made a series on literally nothing. We all worked for free. It's called Sidetracked. It is 12 episodes. And just last week, we put it up on YouTube so everyone can see it for free. So it's great. It's the life of four friends over the course of 24 hours. But hold on to your hats. We shot it over the course of 5 years. So,
Wow.
so the continuity maybe leaves a bit to be hoped for, but the performances are delightful, and it's the kind of story that's so inclusive and so fun, and just when a night spins out of control, and the highs and lows of friendship, and just all of that stuff. So I absolutely love that.
Awesome. Well, Adrian, thank you for giving me some of your time. Enjoyed talking with you. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but it was
All good.
fun.
It's modern life.
Yeah. And with the magic of editing, no one will know the difference.
Beautiful. Look how great we are. Flawless.
You have a great rest of your night. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you, Justin. You too. Have
All
a
right.
good one.
All right. Bye bye. All right, folks. That's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed that chat with Adrian. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you back next time.